TCM shop.
What is the code?
The code. The code was a list of rules that came along from the Motion Picture Association that they put together in 1930 to kind of control what was being said and done in movies, because they were afraid the government was going to come in and censor them and take over the censorship of the movies if they didn't do it themselves. So they put this code together. The problem was nobody paid much attention to it.
Well, as you mentioned, the code was drafted in 1930. It wasn't really implemented until 1934 with Joseph Green under Hayes's office at the MPAA. And in that period in between, we see this kind of heyday of these kind of pulpy movies, and there's a lot of double entendre, there's a lot of sexual innuendo and infidelity and crime and amorality. And so for that 4-year period where everybody seems to be talking about it, and right before they actually have to stop doing it, you see this flood of all these films, which are the subject of what we're going to be dealing with here.
Right. Let's talk about the 1931 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Well, this is a guy who his sexuality is unleashed. And in this movie, you have to have, oddly enough, it works best when you have a guy who, you have to cast Dr. Jekyll. You don't cast Mr. Hyde. You've got to cast somebody who, that rectitude and that decency in them. You have to have Frederick March. You have to have Spencer Tracy, who was a pillar of rectitude in most of his films. You have to have that man who's this very decent man who then goes in this who does this complete 180 and becomes this lascivious monster. One of the other things I love about this film was that Carl Struss was the cinematographer who shot Island of the Lost Souls, one of my favorite movies with Charles Lawton. And this is a wonderfully photographed film as well, although there is that odd thing they do with the lens where you're seeing everything through.
But I love that. I think that's what...
Well, they drop it so randomly.
They do a thing, for those that haven't seen the film yet, but they do a thing that I think is so interesting where it's kind of a time-lapse thing where the camera will be on Miriam Hopkins, maybe in bed, and her torso and her leg, and it stays there and slowly fades away. But before it fades away, another picture of maybe Dr. Jekyll fades in, so you've got the two overlapping. So I don't know, it creates a chemistry between the characters that I think is quite fascinating.
But this movie is ripe for code material or for being singled out for the code, pre-code era, because the very movie itself just comes right out and says, here's a man who's going to just knock down all the walls. All the things we know we should do that separate us from the animals. What separates man from the animals in terms of our lusts and our sensuality and our violence and so forth. Let's just do away with all that. Let me just drink this glass of this potion and I'm going to become like an animal, and he even looks like an animal. And we know how the film ends. I don't want to ruin it for people who don't know, but the behavior of the unbridled man, the Mr. Hyde character, is exactly what the code was aiming towards.
Exactly. But fascinating film, I think.
I think so.
Ruben Mamoulian, have to give him credit as the director. So let's see the movie here. Based on the novel, indeed, by Robert Louis Stevenson, from Paramount in 1931, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.